Hello everybody, my name is Patrick, and as some of you may know, I used to be involved in bullshit martial arts. Not only was I a shitty martial artist practicing useless skills, but I was also an MMA hater. I was one of those guys that was like, oh yeah, MMA sucks. MMA would never work. MMA is garbage, and so are the people who practice it. Yeah, that's right, I was that kind of shithead. But there was a reason why my head was made of shit, and it wasn't entirely that I was hypnotized by the mumbo-jumbo. That was a big part of it, don't get me wrong. But there was actually another piece to the puzzle. See, when I had first turned 15, I had started branching out to other martial arts outside of boxing. Not just Wing Chun, but actually, I had tried MMA before. And boy, did the gym I first go to wind up being the worst possible choice I could have made for choosing an MMA gym. You know that stereotype of MMA fighters that they're all egomaniac meatheads who love to just make another guy bleed so that they can feel more like a man? And obviously, that's mostly bullshit. But I'm not joking when I say that this was actually that kind of MMA gym. See, unbeknownst to me, the owner of this gym was a huge egomaniac. He literally drove off any coaches who knew what they were doing, and any students that were actually interested in learning didn't stick around long. So consequently, that just left him and all the students who just were that negative stereotype of an MMA meathead. And it's not just my experience who were like that. I talked to plenty of coaches who used to work there, and they either quit or were fired because they were too popular among students. And I talked to a lot of former students who were like, yeah, I used to train there, but then the owner just took over teaching my classes one day, and I didn't want to go back after that. So now we'll get into my personal experiences with this gym. So the first thing I did was I called up, and a receptionist answered me, and I told her, yeah, I want to join the MMA classes there. Is that fine? And she's like, how old are you? And I was like, I'm 15. And she's like, yeah, you're old enough to train with the adults. And I was like, okay. And she's like, however, you can't just join the MMA class. And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, you gotta purchase a private lesson with the owner, and he'll assess your skill level, and then he'll accept you into the class. And I'm like, okay. Is this free? And she's like, nope. And I'm like, oh, well, how much is this? And she's like, oh, it costs the same as a private lesson, $60 per hour. And I was like, is there a mandatory time limit? And she's like, yes, 1 hour. See, what some of you may or may not know is that most gyms typically have a 1 week free policy where they allow you to just join the classes for a week, check out the gym, see if you like it, and if you like it, you'll stay. And if you don't, well, then you don't. You know what I mean? No harm, no foul. It's a week free. And even if your gym in particular doesn't or didn't have that, then typically they'll just say, oh yeah, come in on a class and just see how you like the classes. They don't typically force you to buy a private training lesson with the instructor first. Now, I didn't know any better at this time because I had never trained at an MMA gym before. I just assumed all of them were like that. So I forked over my $60 and I met with the owner and we did a private training session. And calling it training is kind of generous. So I met him and we went into the other room. There was like a main training room and a side training room, and we went into the side training room. And he's like, okay, so how much grappling experience do you have? And I was like, not a lot, if any. And he was like, well, how much striking training experience do you have? And I was like, a pretty decent amount. I've been boxing for 3 years. And he's like, okay, well, we're gonna roll. And for those of you, again, who don't know, rolling is like the sparring of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Again, most skills won't do this. If you entered a boxing gym and they were like, have you ever boxed before? And you said no, they probably wouldn't just throw you a pair of gloves and say, get in the fucking ring. I'm gonna beat the shit out of you to assess your skill level. That's what we did. We rolled for an entire hour, and he didn't teach me like positions or anything. He literally was just like, all right, go! And he also wasn't holding back on me at all. And the reason I could tell that isn't just because in hindsight I have since rolled with purple and black belts, and they're obviously sometimes just letting me work, you know what I mean? Because they could just destroy me like that if they really wanted to. I could tell even back then that he wasn't holding back, because there were 2 or 3 times where I just happened to take his back, and he freaked the fuck out. He like bucked like a bull, trying to get me the fuck off. And so, again, we just rolled for an hour, and he just beat the shit out of me in rolling for an hour, and then he was like, all right, you can join the classes now. Like, that's it? You're not gonna teach me anything? I thought this was supposed to be a private lesson. I literally paid $60 just so that this guy could beat me up for an hour. So then I went to the classes themselves. My first MMA class, which was taught by the owner, it contains your typical like warm-up type stuff of just like jogging, shadow boxing, stretching, getting the blood flowing. And then he was just like, okay, we're gonna do some combat jiu-jitsu for an hour. And for those of you who don't know, again, combat jiu-jitsu is just where you roll, but you're also allowed to strike the other person. Now, his rules were, if you had MMA gloves, you could like do little soft baby punches to your opponent. And if you didn't have MMA gloves, then you could do like light-handed smacks to your opponent. And we were switching off partners every 2 minutes. So I went with the first guy, and he just dominated me. And then I partnered up with the owner, and I was like, listen, I don't know this stuff. Like, I thought this was a class. Like, I thought you were going to teach me stuff. Like, I don't know jiu-jitsu positions. And he was like, oh, okay, well, you just want to sit up. This is your base, and you just don't want your base broken. You know, you want to be, when you're upright and in someone's guard, you just want to be upright and not have your base broken. And that was all he could really teach me before I had time to trade partners. And so literally all I knew was to stay up in this position and to not get broken down. So I went with my next partner, and I immediately just pushed him to the ground and stayed in his guard and just smacked him in the face repeatedly because I didn't know what else to do. And he was just stuck under me the whole time because he didn't know how to get out from under me. That cycle literally repeated itself for 3 more people, and then class was over. So that was my first day of MMA training. I learned how to stay in my base. And I was like, okay, that day was a little rough, but maybe it'll get better. Spoiler, didn't. But I was keeping that attitude. So I went back the next day, and same warm-up, and then we got into our one drill for the whole day. We were doing King of the Hill takedowns with a twist. So how we were doing it exactly was, if you took the other person down, you were the king, and you stayed in, and the other person went to the back of the line. However, if you took the other guy down, and the other guy managed to pull off a submission on his back, such as some sort of guillotine, a flying armbar of some kind, or whatever, then you would actually be the king, and you would stay in, and the other guy would go back. And I heard that, and I was like, okay, I know what I'm going to do here. I'm going to primarily aim for guillotines as I get taken down, because I actually do have a pretty good guillotine off of someone shooting in on me. So it was me versus this guy who was obviously some sort of high school or college wrestler, because he literally showed up in his wrestling shoes with his school's singlet and the headgear. And he shot in on me, and I got my guillotine, and when we landed on the ground, I had him locked in the guillotine. And the owner literally just was like, all right, Patrick, you lose, go to the back of the line. And I was like, I was confused for a second. I was like, wait a minute, but I caught him in a submission. And he was like, nope, didn't see it. And I was just like, okay, I guess. And I went to the back of the line. The dude standing in front of me was like, yo, I saw that. That was bullshit. I'm a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You totally would have choked that guy. And I was like, yeah, I thought so. And he's like, no, you would have. He was like, yeah, I don't know what the fuck he was saying there. And so that was the end of that class pretty much. And I was just like, man, I don't really like these MMA classes. They're kind of shitty. But there were other classes that were there too. And the reason why I kept going back to this gym was because it was the closest gym to my house. I was literally just going there out of convenience. But so I was like, okay, well, I really like boxing. So I think I'm going to start taking the boxing classes and just see how those are. And so I did start taking the boxing class, although there was a slight hiccup when I started taking the boxing classes instead of the MMA classes. I went to the boxing classes one time. I showed up. I just showed up because I knew the scheduling of the school. And the receptionist who I talked on the phone with at the beginning of the story was like, hey, wait a minute. Did you have a private boxing lesson with the owner? And I was like, no. And she's like, well, you have to if you want to take the boxing classes. And I'm like, what? Hold on a second. You have to take a private class with the owner for every single class you want to take at this school. So this school taught wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, MMA, boxing, and kickboxing is a separate thing from Muay Thai. So if you wanted to take any class in the school, you had to fork over $60 for a private lesson for 6 different classes. But without thinking, after she said you didn't take a private class with the owner, I just told her, oh, it's okay. I already know how to box. I don't need a private lesson. Which sounds arrogant, but I had been doing this for 3 years by this point. And she was like, okay, I'll let this go. But so I started to take the boxing classes, and they were actually amazing. They were taught by a completely different guy. And, you know, we went over footwork and form and all this other shit. And we had these great drills and stuff. And honestly, he was a really good teacher. And then after about a month or so, I came to class one day. And the owner was teaching now. And he informed us that he was going to be teaching the boxing classes from now on. The boxing coach that was there, he ain't there no more. He's going to be teaching them now. And I'm like, great. So for that class, he had us all, like, partner up and then practice 1, 2, 3, 4 combos, which is jab, cross, hook, hook, you know? And then after he had us all practice that for a minute, he was like, all right, now I personally want to see each of yours jab, cross, hook, hook combinations and like review it for the whole class. And again, I had been boxing for 3 years by this point, so a 1, 2, 3, 4 combo wasn't exactly new to me. Meanwhile, most of the other people in the class, in this particular class, were like, people who were doing this for fitness or as a hobby or, you know what I mean? Like office workers who were just coming to relieve the tension by hitting some shit. This wasn't a particularly fighter-filled night. So everybody was doing theirs, and they were kind of, you know, weak and slow and full of holes. Not that there's anything wrong with that, I'm just saying for comparison's sake. And he was like, good, good, good. You know what I mean? Like, you're just doing great. And then it came to me. And, you know, I did mine crisper and cleaner than everybody else there. And this dude literally gets a smug little smile on his face, puts his finger to his chin like this, spins around to the entire room, and says, does anybody else see what he did wrong there? And I was confused because I had the cleanest combination there, and I was the only one getting, like, made fun of for it. And everybody else in the room went, no, what are you talking about? And he's like, do it again. So I do it again, just exactly the same way as I do it the first time. Turns back around. Did anybody see it? That time. No. Do it one more time for me. So I do it exactly the same way again. And so I throw it, and then he goes, your left hand should be here. I'm not even joking you. He literally was like, your left hand was here. It should be here. Bro, you literally had people punching like this, and they were getting away from it. My left hand was like half a centimeter away from my face, and I get reamed in front of the whole class for it. So immediately I was like, fuck that criticism. Like, are you shitting me? That was pretty much the end of that day. So the next day I showed up to class and he was teaching. And he was like, all right, it was more of a fighter heavy night. So he's like, everybody's just going to do round robin sparring. Everybody's just going to spar everybody, you know, lightly, but everybody's just going to spar everybody. And so I sparred everybody in the room. And again, they were just meatheads with very little skill. You know what I mean? They just like to beat the shit out of each other. So every single one of them just tried to brawl with me. And so I just kind of picked them apart. And finally, we're switching partners every round. So we're only getting one round to work. And then we switch partners. So I eventually switched to the owner. And he goes, listen, I'm getting complaints. You're hitting my fighters way too hard. And I'm like, what the hell is he even talking about? Like, I even say, dude, I'm not even hitting them that hard. Like, and I wasn't being an asshole, like actually like punching someone with full force and then be like, I'm not even hitting you that hard, dude. No, I was literally, like, I was adding like a little bit of snap to my punches, but I wasn't throwing them with any power. I was just throwing them with snap. You know what I mean? So, like, I wasn't like actually throwing to throw. I was just snapping my punches a little. But he was like, dude, and by the way, some of those fighters were literally trying to clean my fucking clock. They were literally swinging at me like this, like with haymaker hooks. But I'm the one who's throwing too hard. I said, okay, I'll try to go softer. And he's like, thank you. And so we begin our spar, and our spar immediately begins with him throwing a jab at me, and I actually slip it and then throw a hook over top and hit him. And I was actually proud of myself because I hadn't landed a counter like that before, probably ever. But right after I hit him with that, he literally goes, so my arm is over top his like this. He literally loops my arm like this and starts punching me in the fucking face. And I'm just like, I'm like this, and I'm like thinking like, this isn't fucking boxing, dude. But so eventually I'm like, what I'm doing is I'm like slowly trying to like get my arm out because he's not letting go of me. So after every shot I block, I like push punch his face. Like boom, 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 boom. Until eventually my arm got out and I could get back to fighting. But by that point, the round was over. And then lastly, I wound up sparring one of the gym's active amateur fighters. And this dude had something against me, I guess, because you know how I was saying everybody was literally swinging to take my head off? Like, this guy especially, he was going at it with, like, such big, like, he was looking to knock me the fuck out. And so he was, like, going real fucking hard until I closed the distance, and then he clinched me, but, like, he clinched me wrong. Like, typically in boxing, when you clinch, you're trying to get around your opponent's arms so they can't punch you. He clinched me, like, around my waist. So my arms were still free. And I was like, which was good, which would be good for wrestling. He could take me down really easily that way, but we weren't wrestling. So, like, I, like, tried to push him off and he wouldn't let go. So I just started punching him. Like, because he wasn't defending and he wouldn't let go of me and no one was separating us. So I just started, like, striking his fucking head because he just was holding underhooks on me. And then the round ended like that, and the bell dinged. And so he jumped back, and I didn't think anything of it for a second, but he jumped back, and I started to turn away like this. And I literally felt like, I don't know how else to describe it, but pressure under my chin. Like, I literally felt like some form of pressure under my chin. And I was like, huh? And my body reflexively ducked backwards like this, and a huge fucking uppercut missed me by literally this much. So this dickhead literally tried to knock me out with a late uppercut after the bell. And so after that miss, I literally like turned to him and I was like, dude, what the fuck? And he just turned and fast walked away from me. And I was just like, wow, what a fucking piece of shit. The final day that I had gone to this gym, what we were doing, the final nail in the coffin, the final straw that broke the camel's back was we were doing rope-a-dope drills, and I like these drills. I really do. It's just, you know, you have your back against the wall and you have to defend. You know what I mean? Like, you have to block and weave and parry and shit like that. I think it's a phenomenal drill. That being said, at one point, it was my turn to be up against the wall, and I was parrying all of my opponent's punches. I wasn't blocking too much. I was mainly parrying with my front hand because I could get away with it. And the owner comes over to me and he goes, "You're not allowed to do that." And I'm like, why not? It's working. And he's like, because it's not good. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, what if somebody did something like this? And he threw like a punch at me, and I initially went to parry it, and then it was like a feint, and he like turned it into like an overhand this way. So I just like, okay, and I turned my parry into a punch, and I showed that mine would have countered. I would have countered his overhand before it had time to get to me. And then he just literally went, whatever, and he just walked away. And I was just like, this owner is such an asshole that I could not put up with this any longer. And so I left, and I haven't been back to that gym since. Now, that was roughly 10 years ago. Could they have changed things? Maybe, but I'm not going to go back to find out. And that just cemented it in my mind from that point forward. I was like, wow, I guess all of the rumors about MMA fighters are true, that they're just arrogant, shitty meatheads who just are egomaniacs who love to beat the shit out of people to feel superior to them, to make themselves feel better. And that just like, you know, made it easier for me to fall into the bullshit. So I guess the point of this story is that if you do happen to encounter an MMA gym, that's like 1 in 100, I would say. You know what I mean? Are there shitty meathead gyms with unqualified coaches? Yeah, of course. You know, that can happen at any kind of school. But that certainly by far isn't the norm, because ever since then, you know, like I've trained at multiple MMA gyms since then, and that was the only shitty one. Not only was that the only shitty one, that was the only one with shitty people on the whole. Like, you know, everywhere, every other MMA gym I've been to has been filled with the nicest, kindest, most welcoming and humble people I've ever probably met in my life, who actually know how to fight. They're not just meatheads who try to take your head off with fucking shitty clothesline punches. You know, they actually know what they're doing. They actually want to teach you, and they don't want to hurt you. Unfortunately, the first MMA gym I ever went to just happened to be a horrible one that proved every negative stereotype right to me. You know, all they did was take my money and try to beat me up. I don't even think I learned a single thing while I was down there. How to be in my base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I learned one technique in the entire time I was there, and it only cost me like $200. Seems worth it. But that's just another story from me, guys. Let me know what you think about it down in the comments. I'm Patrick, and I'll see you next time.